What's up, Prig Pals? I don't care what line of work you're in, you must write. And even if you're not in one of those conventionally white-collar jobs where you're forced to write memoranda and emails to your colleagues on the regular, you're a student who has to write a paper. And even if you're not a student, well, someone's got to draft that complaint to the homeowners association or the letter to your child's teacher explaining that she's going to need a little extra help in the classroom. Or maybe you're just writing down your thoughts in advance of an important meeting or interview. Indeed, most of the time when we're writing, it's not enough simply to get your point across. One has to do so persuasively, powerfully, and with panache. Today, I'm going to give you 5 time-tested principles to improve your writing from the very next word you set down, courtesy of one of the greatest grammar and usage guides of all time. My name is Ryan Kelly, your square Esquire and lovable prig, giving all manner of writers, rewriters, and speakers tips and tidbits on the lexical tools of their trade, the better that they might be able to distinguish themselves as careful users of the language and take their communication skills from enough to effective. I release videos every Thursday, so make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you don't miss a chance to learn the best ways with words. With that said, let's get underway. But before I do, the credit for these principles belongs to Henry Watson Fowler and his brother George Fowler, who in 1906 jointly authored the Grammar and Usage Guide, The King's English. As a former writing tutor, teacher, copy editor, and courtroom litigator, I can personally attest that even over a century later, its guidance still holds true today. That's why I want to tell you about it. Now, without further ado, let's jump into the principles. The first principle is to prefer the familiar word to the far-fetched. And basically that means if you have to go to your thesaurus to find that word that's supposedly on the tip of your tongue, chances are it's not the right word for you. More to the point, the synonym you're considering using probably carries some nuance or a shade of meaning that would make it inappropriate to the context. Here's an example. Let's say I'm drafting some complaint to a municipal authority saying that someone spat on me. I don't know. But instead of the word spat, I use the word expectorated. Ooh, 5 syllables long. Now, a trip to the dictionary would have told me that the word expectorate means something a little more than merely the expelling of saliva. Without getting too graphic, the word expectorate usually refers to, well, I'll just say it, hawking up phlegm. Now, I don't know about you, but hawking phlegm on someone seems a lot more disgusting and a lot more vile than simply spitting on them. And maybe it doesn't really matter in this scenario if we're being realistic, but the point is, my reaching for some out-of-the-way word has now left the reader in doubt as to what precisely happened. The moral of the story? Don't be afraid to use those old, reliable, familiar words. They've been doing good work all these years, so why ditch them now? The second principle is to prefer the concrete word to the abstract. And in the world of writing, the hallmark of abstraction is, well, the presence of the suffix tion, in addition to an abundance of nouns. Don't believe me? The Fowler brothers provide this example, which I couldn't have made up myself, quite honestly. The signs of the times point to the necessity of the modification of the system of administration. Now notice that this sentence isn't well nigh unreadable just because of the words ending tion. It's all those nouns. The, heralded by all those definite articles. So, how do they change it? Here's the sentence they give as a translation. It is becoming clear that the administrative system must be modified. Which in truth I might take a step further and turn it into, it's becoming clear that we must change the administrative system. Overall, you can see that instead of a cavalcade of nouns, our word choice in our new sentence has now been variegated through the use of verbs and adjectives, conferring velocity and vivacity to our sentence. The third principle is to prefer the single word to the circumlocution, and that's a nice out-of-the-way word on the Fowler's part, but essentially what they're saying is, why conscript 4 words to do the work of 1, or even none? If you happen to be doing editing for economy, look for the words basis, case, purposes, and instance. They usually are a signal of wasted space. Here are some examples. If I begin with the sentence, my daughter does her homework completely on her own in most cases, I can turn it into, my daughter does her homework mostly on her own. If I start with the sentence, for purposes of preparation for the holiday parade, I think the street should be swept in advance, I can turn it into the sentence, I think the street should be swept before the parade. If I start with the sentence, I was unfairly stopped by the officer on the basis of my taillight being out, I can turn it into the sentence, I was unfairly stopped because my taillight was out. If I start with the sentence, I go jogging on a daily basis, and this is a very popular construction, I can turn it into, I go jogging daily. That's all you have to say. And finally, if I start with the sentence, in this instance, I think that my neighbor is at fault for failing to cut down that tree, I can turn it into the sentence, I think that my neighbor is at fault for failing to cut down that tree. Now, if you're so worried that your reader isn't going to be able to divine from your use of the present tense verb is that you are in fact referring to the present, you can at least use this time instead of in this instance, which in my opinion is still a waste of words, but at least you're saving a word. Point being, imagine how much more effective we'd be as communicators if we cleansed our prose of all those meaningless counter words. Our final two principles kind of go together, so I'm going to be addressing them as a pair. But before I do, if you're getting value out of this video, share Lovable Prig some love and give it a like. And if you want to hear more tips on how to elevate your communication and hence your career prospects, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. So the next to last principle is to prefer the short word to the long. And the final principle is to prefer the Saxon word to the Romance. I know. What is that about saxophones and romance? Don't worry guys, your prig's gotcha. In layman's terms, Romance words are those that are derived from Latin, which is the language of, all together now, Rome. Typically Latin words are easy to spot because they usually end in T-I-O-N, kind of seeing how everything works together now. Or if they're verbs, they end in A-T-E. If you're thinking of using such a word, just exchange it for a shorter, simpler equivalent. There almost always is one. I mean, what wedding officiator worth their salt would ever say, "You may now osculate the bride"? But seriously, a more plausible example. Let's say we start with this sentence. The emaciation of the panhandler was likely attributable to a deprivation of food. Two Latin words here in the main, emaciation and deprivation. So, under one theory of improvement, I could simply find the buried verbs, as some linguists say. Thus the sentence becomes, the panhandler had emaciated because he'd been deprived of food. That's better, but how do we take our sentence from better to best? If we apply our final two principles, we get this sentence. The panhandler was gaunt from an utter lack of food. See how much more crisp and alive our sentence is? See how much more picturesque it is? And notice that we actually added a noun in the form of lack, which means these principles are not designed to conflict with each other. Their overriding concern is helping you write plain English, or in the words of Fowler, direct, brief, simple, vigorous, and lucid English. So there you have it. 5 principles to improve your writing from the very next word you set down. And now that you will never think of words the same way again, thanks to this little lecture, why don't you tell me what principles you would add to this list? Share Lovable Prig some more love and leave a comment below. And I'll see you next time. And remember, propriety is always in.